Welcome to the Subconscious Photography Podcast, where art meets science, reality meets perception, all through the lens of a camera. Now, please ready your lenses, open your minds, and let's delve into the fascinating world of subconscious photography. Okay, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is where you are listening. Welcome to another episode of the Subconscious Photography Podcast. We have with us today a guest who will be first in a number of categories. She is the first woman photographer we've had on. She is the first non-American photographer. I won't spoil it by telling you what country she's from yet. She is the first postgraduate photography student who is still a student that we've had on, and certainly probably by far the youngest guest we've had on. So I'd like everybody to welcome to the show Laura Skog. I know I've butchered her name now. She's a photographer currently residing in Switzerland, but she'll tell you about her travels in her young life and where she's been and where else she was raised and her influences. Laura and I met, as many of you know, and probably more of you don't know, I am enrolled in a master's program in professional photography at the Oxford Brookes University in the United Kingdom. Laura is a graduate of the bachelor's program and now is in the master's program. And I'll just say Laura's a very brave woman because there are, 5 students in the class total. 4 are men. The 5th one is Laura, obviously. The 4 men, our instructors refer to as mature students, which is just a diplomatic way of saying we're all geezers, or for you people in America, geriatric. That means old, in case you were wondering. So we're all pretty old. And for me, it's kind of intimidating because Laura's got her BA and is a working professional photographer. There is a professional commercial photographer. There's another gentleman who also has his BA in photography. And then there's me and a guy from Norway who I can't wait till we get on this show, who is maybe not formally educated in photography, but holy cow, can that guy take some photos. In any event, as I said, Laura's a working photographer. You can see her work on her website at Laura, L-A-U-R-A, Skog, S-K-O-G, photography, I'm not spelling that, .com. So Laura, welcome to the show. And I usually say this is an interview, but today, this will be a conversation. So welcome.
Thank you, David, for having me on your podcast. What an honor. Thank you.
Thank you for agreeing to come on this podcast, since I think this will be maybe the 8th episode. If I'm lucky, you will be the 10th episode, and that will be another first, because we will have cracked into double digits. So let me just start out, as I start out every conversation, by asking you your name, rank, and serial number, or in layman's terms, if you can just tell us a little bit about your background and how you got to where we are.
Sure. Okay. My name is Laura Skog, and I was born to a Swiss mother and a Swedish father in Uruguay, actually, in South America. And we moved to the States for a few years and then over to Vienna and finally settled down in Switzerland, in the heart of Switzerland, in a place called Zug. And yeah, I think I'll talk a little bit about my photography background otherwise and how I came to photography, if that's all right for you.
Yeah. And if you don't mind, since I would never ask a woman her age, but because we have now said you are the youngest guest on this podcast, if you could just give us a range.
I am in my late 20s.
So you are by far the youngest guest on this podcast ever.
Yeah.
So please,
What an honor.
Tell us a little bit about like how you got started, how you ended up at Brooks for your BA and now your master's.
Yeah, obviously growing up and moving around a lot, there were a lot of changes in schools and education background and stuff. But I eventually went to an international school in Switzerland. And from there, I was deciding a little bit what creative part of the industry do I want to work in. It was very clear to me from an early age on that it would have to be something that involved creativity and working with people. And yeah, I always took pictures. That was one of the things that my friends, they will tell me until today, that when we met up, it was like, hey, can we go take pictures? Can we go do this? Can we do that? And it was my favorite thing to do. And it was my way of, I think I have a different reflection on it today, but it was a way of making sense of the world around me. And I think that's a phrase that you'll hear very commonly in the photography world. So there was this subconscious being drawn to photography, speaking of. And I came to Brooks and I wasn't even aware that it would be possible to study photography. It was like, oh, I really enjoy this. This is like my passion. I love this. But I didn't think that would be something that you could pursue as a career in that sense. And I was really lucky, met Grant, and it all came along that way. And I'm really grateful for Grant and for the opportunity, actually. I really enjoyed my BA at Oxford Brooks. And that was where it all started off. And so I did my BA, that was 2019 until 2022. And I then started my own company in Switzerland. And we were studying during COVID times. So the circumstances were a bit different. But when we finished, I started my own company in Switzerland and I started taking some commissions for portraits, for example, like company portraits or family pictures, or what else did I do? Maternity photo shoots. So all these kind of fun things. However, I decided to enroll to the master's now in 2024. That's where we met. It's a new course and it's a new degree. And I thought, okay, I really enjoyed the BA. I really enjoyed the lectures and the topics we discussed and this exchange of the other students and other photographers. And I know how much it benefited me and how much it meant to me. And so it was a no-brainer. I wanted to join and do the MA. And it's been really lovely. I'm really grateful having met all of you. And it's inspiring every week, getting to see everyone's different work and speak about it and reflect on things together. It's quite invaluable. So yeah, that's where I am today. I think I've also realized that I am enjoying doing these commissions and then taking the commissions, but my part kind of goes out to my personal projects in the aspect that I've been working on something since 2021. This is now, it's been 4 years. That is what actually finished during my BA, is what I did as my kind of final major project. That's where it originated. And I'm still working on that today. And it's a long-term project that I'm really invested in. And it's a personal work that I think has also shown me what direction I want to go in as a photographer. And it's taken a lot of patience and a lot of brain to get here. But yeah, with a master's, I've actually had the opportunity to deepen that and to really do a deep dive on that. And I'm really, really happy for that.
So let me ask you, when you said earlier, because obviously this is the Subconscious Photography Podcast, and many people have said, in fact, one of our instructors, David Eustace, said to me in one of our classes that I subconsciously was composing my photos, which is totally true because I've never consciously composed a good photo in my entire life. But when you say that you subconsciously came to photography, like, how does that translate for you? In other words, how did you? I understand some people at an early age, they get a camera, they're very interested in it, but saying that you were subconsciously drawn to photography to me is something more than just your parents gave you a camera and you really like taking pictures.
Yeah, and this is a really interesting one because I have always been interested in language, culture, people, and I am going to fast forward now into 2, 3 years ago, where I actually got late diagnosed. I identified as neurodiverse, and this is something that has been a bit of a wake up call for me, also in understanding. It's given me a lot of clarity in what I am drawn towards, and things have made a lot of sense. Also, the photography per se, and I've been very interested in people and relationships and what goes on and the emotions and colors. And so I'll get into this gladly in a moment, but I love photography, but I love what it kind of allows me to do. And it's not necessarily, I'm not so interested in the tool per se, if I may say. So this is not what I want to actually say. I'd love to talk about this. I work with a Fujifilm and with Canon, and so digital. I don't work with anything else. And I've always been drawn with these colors and contrast and light. For me, I've always said light is light, and I've really been drawn towards these things. Now, seeing kind of these connections that I've been able to make, seeing why it is that I'm so drawn towards this and why they are so visually appealing and so visually stimulating and interesting to me. And I think this is also where music comes into play. A lot of my work is also influenced by music. I did a project which is called Hunger in My Heart, and it turned into a photo book. And this was during my bachelor's degree. And the photo book ended up having a QR code in the beginning where you could scan it with your phone, and you would have to have Spotify, but it would open up a Spotify playlist and you would be able to go through the book and experience the book with that intention of these chapters. And it was about a young girl in adolescence and learning a little bit about growing up and navigating in the world. And so we built this playlist together, which inspired the work and brought, I guess, a little bit more context and emotion into it as well. So yeah, I have always loved my camera, as I would say like that, but it's never really been that important to me. And say that with, I don't say that trying to be ignorant or anything, but it's just allowed me to do things that I wouldn't have done otherwise or seen or experienced. And I really don't, I'm really not a technical person in that aspect. I know what I have to do with my camera, but God forbid someone asks me technical questions or anything like that, because that's just not my approach to photography. Let's put it that way.
Well, I'll say this, as you know, and everybody knows by now, I refer to myself as the geezer of gear because for a period of time I was collecting a lot of cameras, but that had more to do with, I think, my upbringing and not being able to afford these things. And now I'm in a position where I can afford them and I wanted to collect them. I only ever learned on film. So, other than a cell phone camera, I have no experience with digital. But every photographer that I've spoken to on this podcast or in general says the same thing. The camera's a box that focuses light onto something, film, a sensor, whatever it might be, and everything else is up to you and the light and what you see and what you decide to point your camera at. I personally don't think it's ignorant. People have been writing books for years. There's a famous one by Jay Mizell called "It's Not About the F-Stop," right? Meaning, who really cares what your settings are? It's really about the light and how you take pictures and where you take them and where you point your camera. And so your answer to the last question, it leads me to this question because I am very jealous of people who see things like you, because either my law training beat the creativity out of me completely or I was blind to light and color. But when you take some of your pictures, like we were talking earlier about the landscape photo that you've taken that I just love, which I believe is on your website. It's like, for those of you who want to see it, please go to Laura's website. But it's a long road lined by tall trees in the snow. There's nobody in the photo. The lighting, I will say, it's a black and white photo. The lighting looked like it was overcast out because it seems very soft, softly lit, not very harsh shadows, kind of an eerie feeling,
Yeah.
but not in a scary way. Just a beautiful, beautiful photograph. So when you take photographs like that, can you consciously see the light? Are you consciously looking for how the light is falling on the trees or the snow or whatever it might be in the frame?
Yeah, it's a good question. I do pay attention to this. I think I also have to say, I have to preface this by saying I take a lot of time for the images and sometimes I wait it out. For me, it's a thing that has a lot to do with emotion and to know when the moment is right, this decisive moment of emotion. And it's like constructing an image. I see the light, and for me, I think it comes in again, knowing this way of seeing and the way that the subconscious and this neurodiversity also affects the way that I photograph. It's almost like seeing kind of layers. I compose the frame, but I'm looking for the light and I'm looking how the light is falling. Like I said, it's light is life. And it's perhaps also something that I got from my father's side, from my Swedish side, where light is a very sacred thing, especially up in the north, where in the wintertime, it's just something that you don't really get to see that often. And when you do, you really appreciate it. And I personally also want to say that I don't really like hard light. I don't photograph with flash. I can use a softbox in some instances, but I try to refrain from doing that. I really like natural light, but I don't like this harshness of certain weather conditions or light. I think it's very heavy on the eyes. I personally find so. And so in my images, when there's this kind of also where the Nordic noir comes into influence, I really enjoy Nordic noir and this kind of flat light that's coming in. And so I do try to incorporate that in. And I do think that it's deciding if when or what or whether or how I take that photograph or not.
That's a very interesting answer because if people go to your website, I think you have photos from your long-term project up there from the people in your village. And there are some interior photos that you've taken of people where there's what I'll call a trickle of light coming in from a window and you'll set the subject so that the light is coming across the person. Many photographers would try and fill that in with something, not enough to blow the light coming from the window out, but just
Mhm.
enough to fill maybe the foreground or maybe to create some depth between the subject and the background, for example. But like you said, you really try not to do that. And I think to very good effect. I mean, a lot of your indoor natural light, and I really encourage people to go to Laura's website to take a look at these photos, but a lot of your indoor natural light portraits, let's say a lesser photographer might have felt the need to put a flash on their camera or at least a softbox somewhere in the room. And can you talk to us, particularly those of us who still shoot film, who would be terrified to do that because we don't get immediate feedback from the camera in terms of what the light looks like. What what makes you so confident when you take those pictures? Because those pictures really do exude a lot of confidence from a photographic point of view because you're not afraid to use that natural light and not use any artificial light.
Might have to say I had a mother when I grew up. My mother would always come into my room and she'd be like, "Why are you sitting in the dark? Why is it so dark in here?" I was like, "Because it's so soothing to sit in here when you kind of turn on that overhead light. It's so intense. There's this addition of light that I felt like was just not. I didn't like. I didn't think it was. It didn't feel good. And I think when I come into these situations, like you said now, where there is only so and so much natural light, and it is very dark. I'm going to take this one example. The project we're speaking about is you can find it on my website under projects. It's 6318, and that actually stands for the postal code of the village where I am doing my work and photographing people and the culture and landscape and looking at identity and what is it like to have this insider and outsider identity. I might say we moved there in 2007. And for me, it is a location that I identify as with my home. I, yeah, our neighbors, friends have become family. And I'm so intrigued by this kind of, I feel like I'm a part of the place, but I'm also not. And this kind of conversation with the landscape and what goes on with the identity is what I'm photographing there. And so there's portraits and landscape and all of that in there. But I go in there and I, for example, we'll take this. Tony, who lives on the top of the mountain, he makes these traditional Swiss cowbells. And he like hammers these plates by hand into these shapes of the cowbells and in all kinds of different sizes and shapes. And it's really interesting. And he does this on his farm where he grew up as a child in that proximity. And he takes a lot of pride in his beautiful farm, beautiful animals. And then there's this room or this stable, let's call it like that, where he has these cowbells hanging. And it's like his working area, one of two. But we're in there and you can kind of like, you smell the hay, you smell the stable. Mind you, it's also, I'm taking these things into consideration. Like I said, I'm not very technical in that aspect. Like I choose the camera I'm using based on, again, a feeling. Like what is it I'm trying to do? And when I have certain people I'm photographing or certain subjects, they're very sensitive. I don't want to say delicate in a negative way, but when they're very delicate and they're fragile, it's very intimate. Then I'm leaning towards using my Fujifilm. It's a very soft approach, if I may say so. And this is my approach. I'm not saying this is right or wrong, but it's just if we're speaking about how I'm doing it, then I'll gladly talk about that. But if I use my Canon, I know I can rely on that camera. It just goes. It's great. But that's not the point. It can be very intimidating to show up with such a big camera that's making so much noise. And these are the kind of things that I take into consideration. And I'm standing there with a man that's what feels like 2 meters tall, and he's a big, strong man. And it's a little bit like you need to think, what is coming into this scene? Like, what are we bringing in here? We see all the cowbells lined up. Then it's a little bit messy on the table, which I find this fantastic because people say, oh, it's so messy in here. But no, I think it's so visually interesting in here. You maybe don't quite understand, but my perspective coming into your space, first of all, what a privilege. Thank you for having me because I think it's a very private thing to bring someone in to your life or where you live. And then in addition to that, please don't change anything because I don't want what you think I want. I just want to be here with you. And this is where you're maybe somehow a little bit of a wallflower, but you also need to be very careful and sensitive in the way that you're with these people. Everyone's different and everyone reacts to the camera different. And I just feel like standing in that room, it's like when there's like dust in the air and then the light comes in, that's all there was. And I need to take the picture the way that I am perceiving it. And then all these sensory things coming in, I don't want to go and change that is what I would think. Now, I don't want to go and change that. I want to do the best I can of what I'm given in that aspect. So I need people to feel that when they look at the picture. And maybe people look at it and they don't feel exactly what I felt, but there's been a lot of people who've come back to me and said, this makes me feel this and this. And that's why it's reminding me of something where I came from or my background or something that emotionally touched me because of the emotion that there was in the image. So I don't know if that makes sense the way I'm explaining it, but I just feel like I need to get those senses into an image. I need to somehow get it in there. And I don't want to go and change something about it, even if it's dark. And there's nothing wrong with that. I also want to say when you say maybe someone who's like lesser confident or something like that, I have to say I have been very shy about the way that I photograph. In the sense that I didn't really speak so much about how I do things because I thought this is really weird. And I go on and talk to other photographers or I go to, I don't know, a seminar or something. And then people are talking about all these things. And I think I have absolutely no idea what you're talking about. And to realize coming on the masters and speaking with you guys and having had so much time to reflect and to grow, especially in this long-term project, to realize that it's okay the way that I approach this because this is how I'm taking my images and it works for me. And there's no reason to feel like an imposter in photography just because I feel like the approach is different. And so, yeah, I don't know. I just feel like it's allowing me also to let go of that and also say, this is the way I do it. And that's okay because it works, and not to really feel embarrassed about that.
Oh, no, and certainly not. And when I said that your pictures exude this confidence, I mean it from a technical point of view. You talk about the fact that you pick your cameras depending on who you're photographing and what the situation's going to be like. And I think we all do. I have a Hasselblad that sounds like a cannon went off whenever you trip the shutter. So it's the first couple of times you try and take pictures of people with that camera, they literally flinch. So I understand what you mean in that regard. But I do think that your decision to take the pictures because with the natural light, because of the way it makes you feel and because of the fact that you want to try and capture what it really looks like when you're in there is great and really works for you. But in addition, you're confident enough to do that without wanting, and I don't want to say the extra lighting is a crutch, but without wanting to sort of ensure that you've gotten a great exposure by adding more light to it. Like, you're confident enough in your ability and your sense of what the finished product is going to look like that you're not fearful of not adding more light. For example, in my background, I took pictures of weddings and big events, big life events. And I started out as a photographer's assistant carrying a big box of lights and a step ladder where I held a flash over people's heads so the entire thing would come out perfectly lit. And so I can remember times when we had failures of that equipment where the person I was working with was terrified that the pictures were not going to turn out the way they wanted them to turn out. And I'd say, you have a light meter. What does it say? Set it to that and let's keep going. But, some people really, I want to say people who are trained in a certain way, and that works for them, rely on that kind of stuff. But, like I said, you're confident enough not to wanna do that.
Yeah, I think it took some time to get there to be confident in doing that. And it's a little bit of this learning the rules and then kind of forgetting about the rules and seeing what feels right and what is right. And it wasn't always like that. And I think it was important to learn about this, especially on the bachelor's course, learning about, hey, you can light this in this way and you can do that. But then actually going back and thinking, what is it that feels right for me in my work? And like I said, that confidence wasn't always there. And I was very quiet about the way that I did stuff in my work. It was just something where it was felt like I really don't know how to talk about these lenses, or I really don't know kind of how to talk about all these numbers. For me, also, I have to say, I'm not very good at numbers per se. So it was always like, how are you doing this? And it was like, well, I need to get the emotion right. I need to get that right. And sometimes I need to just sit and think and feel. And that's how the image would happen. And maybe that sounds crazy, but that's just what's been working. And
Oh, listen, there's no need to apologize for being enumerate. I am the king of enumeracy. Every time I wanna increase or decrease my exposure by 2 stops, I ask my phone what that means. So if I say, like, my light meter says I should shoot a picture at this, but I want to increase it 2 stops, what should I set my camera to? Because I can never remember if you add it twice, you multiply by 2, you add it to itself. It's a very, and then you have to do the arithmetic, which is also challenging for me. But one of the things you did say that I wanted to follow up with you on is that you look at the scene and you see what feels soothing to you, but then you get feedback from the viewer about, oh, this made me feel so good. It reminded me of XYZ. And I don't know if you remember, but certainly at the beginning of the first semester, I really struggled with the idea that there was no such thing as just a pretty picture of a flower. I remember asking Grant that question on my interview. I remember asking Connor that question during the first semester. And in fact, my cousin who I interviewed last for the show, who has a master's of fine arts in photography, I said, "Isn't there just a picture? Can't there just be a picture of a pretty flower?" And he said, "No. Have you learned nothing yet?" And so I understand that you take photos that for you seem soothing and make you feel in a certain way, but how does the feedback from the viewer make you not only make you feel, but does it change your approach going forward?
Yeah. So I, it's a good question. Obviously, the feedback is of course, it comes into my work that I then produce going forward. But I think it's so difficult to say that you find an image pretty or I like an image. It can feel very subjective. I try and ask myself why and what does it make you feel in that sense. So maybe you can pick as basic as saying point out an adjective or a verb or something like that for how it makes you feel. And I don't really I think a lot of my work goes back to nostalgic or feelings and this kind of I've also discussed this and the work being in a way a loss of innocence also and a loss of innocence. And I saw that in my work with Yulia where we did Hunger in My Heart. And it was these are things that I think people are able to relate to and people are able to find a connection. And that's really important to me is that people are able to look at it and like I said, they don't have to feel what I felt, but maybe they can draw a connection to something similar in themselves or within themselves that creates an emotion. I don't necessarily, yeah, maybe it's writing because a lot of my work also contains some context, as in writing poems and or the music. And if you can ask yourself why am I taking this picture? Why does it make me feel this? Why am I looking at this picture? Why does it make me feel this? I've been writing a lot about this kind of collaboration of a photographer and the subject yes, the subject and the viewer. And it's this looking at this theory of this triangular motion connection with each other. And what does it do? And what are the things where you look at them, like what are you can see very clear things that you know what they are but then there's also that emotional layer that comes in, and that's very subjective, but it's really important. And I think that's what drives the work that I do.
But
Yeah.
you're still taking pictures. In other words, you still make your images for you, despite the fact that you get feedback from others. So you're not, I think it's
Mhm.
important for people to understand because, quite frankly, until I started this course, when I would look through the viewfinder, I would sometimes think, what objectively will people find pleasing in the scene that I'm looking at through my viewfinder? In other words, I was trying to make good looking photos for someone for what I perceived as what the public might like. And I'm not even talking about social media, but I just mean what's an objectively nice looking landscape, right?
Yeah.
And so what I'm hearing you say is even though you get feedback and you incorporate it, you're still taking the photos that look good to you. In other words, make you feel however they make you feel, and then make the image as opposed to stopping yourself and thinking, well, this image feels good to me, but what's it going to feel like to whomever,
Mhm.
somebody else?
I think it's important to then consider I might I'm gonna say like now, shouldn't use this word, but I have a connection to an image that I took. But then the work that I'm showing it in, the context that I'm showing it in, is it appropriate for this? That is something that I'm also considering with the images that as in like in the edit, for example. But I am taking images for myself and I felt like they have been, it's, it's the images that I would say have been the most successful ones because I've not tried to do something different. I've not tried to change something about myself or the image just to please. And what does that even mean? To please
Well,
someone else.
I don't, and please is maybe the wrong word, but to try and match the image to some objective sense of beauty or landscape or whatever the case may be.
Yeah. I think I just try and get, I just want it to be as it is. And you always, you're always kind of conducting or changing or setting up something. I feel like what's the photographic truth even? What is it really? But you try and morally and ethically do the right thing, but you always bring something into it. But I try and look at it as what it is and what am I given in this situation? And how can I do, how can I obviously, I'll say take this photograph, but also stand by maybe the morals and ethics of what I hold as a photographer doing this. And I don't really want, it's like when you take a portrait of someone and then you have this kind of almost, if I may say so, facade that is set up because most people aren't comfortable being photographed. I mean, I myself, I also don't really like photographing taken, but I am.
By the way, I always refer to myself as a vampire and that I do not show up on any photographic film or digital photos.
Why does no, it's I think it's a very intimate thing to take a portrait or to do a portrait, and it's a collaboration. And this is something that I really, really had to learn about with this 6318 project, where I went to these people who maybe never had other people photograph them before in their life, at least not in this way. And the first response was kind of like, what were you just going to take the picture and leave? Or, and it was a little bit horrifying because that's no. And I was like, I'm going to be here for as long as you give me time to be here. And I would like to, you tell me what you think is right. Tell me what you want to tell me. And I'll be here. I want to hear about you and get to know you because I don't want this to be like a deer in the headlights, like, let me just take a picture. Thank you very much. And that's it. It's not about myself in that aspect. That I have to say that. But I think it's this waiting it out and seeing a little bit like, you might think I want this smile or I want this from you, but let's kind of settle down. And a lot of these times people have started telling stories from their childhood or just from their past and things in their life that, dare I say, they would never have told me if I wasn't standing there with a camera. And I think I have to say I also gave them the space to do that. And I'm very cautious of this. I don't really want anybody because it's a very intimate thing. I don't want it to come across as give me, I want this. And to be more of it's a collaboration, it's a teamwork. And these stories that people then tell you, it's very intimate, very private. And I think you have to kind of also take that into consideration, taking pictures. And yeah, I think that is, now we've gone on a tangent here. We've gone off track.
No, this is no, we have not gone off on a tangent. This is your process, which is
Uh,
what I asked you. And I will say this, you refer to your work as, or at least your approach to your work in a nostalgic way. I would not use the word nostalgia because I've often said, oh, I'm nostalgic for a time period that I never lived in. So how can I possibly be nostalgic for that time? But what I think your work really reflects is a sense of universality, right? That it's not nostalgia. It's just some set of universal truths that people relate to across time, not because you're longing for a time, when life was simpler or whatever. It's that your photos capture images of people and their emotions and their day-to-day lives that everyone can relate to. So I think it's less nostalgic and more kind of a universal approach to the work. I don't know if feel free to tell me I'm completely off the mark, but I do think that that's what comes across to me as a viewer of your work.
Very interesting reflection to hear. Yeah. Good. Thank you.
So Something else you touched on that I have on my 10,000 pages of questions, which, by the way, we will not ask all 10,000 pages, but was a question that we talked about a little bit. I want to say the first semester of our classes, but our instructor, Grant, is fond of using the phrase photography is memory made history.
Really?
And so it struck me when you were talking about how you frame up your pictures and the light. And this is just a really general question that we could spend hours on, but do you try and obviously this is I'm not asking from an ethics point of view. There's a lot of buildup for this question, by the way. I'm not asking for you from an ethics point of view or moral point of view, but do you think that any particular image actually depicts what happened in a particular moment? Now, I'm exempting from that photojournalistic pictures of car accidents that were taken contemporaneously with the event, because trust me, having been in court many times with videotape and still photographs, there are plenty of ways to punch holes in quote unquote photos that prove what actually happened, right? So, in a more general sense, not a sport picture, right? Not a explosion, but just when you point your lens, are you thinking about, is this image actually capturing what's going on? Or are you trying to make the image more fit your own subconscious, for lack of a better word? In other words, do you think of yourself more as a painter or more as a photojournalist war correspondent?
Yeah, something that has changed over time, the way that I've viewed this. I now would say I look at it more from like an artist's perspective. And I say this because I think there is, yes, the subconscious, but I also think there's a lot of things that in your life that accumulate to the way that you are. So you have like this, all of these different things coming in your life that have formed and shaped you and your perception and the way that you see and think and do things. And I say your environment and the people and everything, but the way that you conduct yourself, I would argue the way that you are and the way that you see or maybe you position yourself when you take a photograph or the specific things that you have in your frame or that you leave out of the frame, there is that, I'll say, bias. There is this thing that's coming in that you, even when you want to take something as like, oh, this is like the truth, this is what it was. I said this earlier, this is the way it is, this is what I'm getting. But I say that knowing that I'm bringing myself into this as well. I think there's almost, I, this is tricky. I think I can't really take myself out of the image that I'm creating because it's you're putting a part of yourself in that image too. And this is something that with the 6318 project where I was like, oh, I'm photographing the people and the landscape and all the tradition and history. And I came to a point where I realized, is it right for me to keep myself out of this project and to say, oh, I don't want to include myself? Not really, because it's this long-term project that I've been engaging with the landscape. It's a place that I also consider my home. And I say this intentionally, a place, because when a space receives like what a space has emotion and meaning and memories tied to it, and it's a place that's significant. And I don't want to change the way that I'm seeing things. And I see, for example, there's a photograph of my dog that I took of my dog on the mountain, and I thought, should I even leave this in? And yes, I'm leaving it in the project, depending on what edit it is, but I'm keeping it for the work because it's the way that I saw it and the way that it all ties together in the story. And I just feel like it's almost impossible to remove yourself there. And yes, you are kind of taking images for yourself and you are.
Well, I mean, certainly what you're describing is that the first edit or crop of any photograph is done by the photographer and their feet. and where they point their lens, right? Because you could have a picture of a very serene landscape and there could be
Why?
fires going on either side of you, right? But you pick that portion to take a picture.
Why were you? Why did you make the decision to stand there? Why did you make? Why are you there? What are the reasons for you doing things the way you are? And it's such a complex question. I think it's really fascinating, and again, subconscious. But it's become really important to me to acknowledge that in what I'm doing as well. And
So
yeah,
now let me tell you why I asked you those questions, because they were all a trick to lead up to this question.
you can go ahead.
This is my secret lawyer coming out. So I assume you're familiar with the painting, The Girl with the Pearl Earring
No,
by Vermeer. The Vermeer painting, it's just a black background with a girl, a young girl. They don't know who she is. They refer to you've seen it 1,000 times, trust me. They call it the Mona Lisa of the North. But when AI first came out, so picture a square canvas, not that large, black background. The colors of the girl's wearing a blue dress and a white turban or head wrap and one giant pearl earring. And when AI, I remember when one of the first AI models came out, they took that picture, that painting, and they made it 16 by 9 in scale. And they took out the black background, and then everything behind her was what Vermeer's studio was supposed to look like.
Mm.
But that was all created by AI. And because there's never been a painting, he never painted the inside of his own studio, so nobody knows what it looks like. And so the question is, and this is why I sort of tricked you into asking you, like, do you try and actually depict what happened? Do you consider that to be a depiction of what happened? Or since the artist wanted to paint a picture of the girl on a black background, is that actually what happened? In other words, what did the place really, quote, really look like? And does it matter?
does it matter? I don't really think so because, in a way, when you pay attention to small details and the way that you see things, I'm very aware of how I'm looking at the world around me now. I'm very aware of the way that my brain works and how my eyesight works. For the longest time, may I say, I have had somewhat okay eyesight, but when I went to the eye doctor, he was like, "You're gonna have to come back in because I'm not sure about this." So I went back in a second time, and yeah, it turns out that there's like a +1 and a +3 difference on my eyes, and it was like okay. And then I remember getting the lenses, so I got the glasses, and I just felt it's horrendously. It felt like 3D, 4D. It was like this is too much. Like it was an uncomfortable sensation to see that clearly, and I consciously leave those glasses away because I'm very aware of how I pay attention to certain details. Now, if the painter or if the photographer sees something, and I think it's a very difficult thing, like you said, morals and ethics, like deliberately changing something or isn't to trick something or to lie or manipulate in a negative way to alter a story. However, if that is what you're seeing, that is what your eye is drawn to. Okay, it was just the pearl earring. It
Okay,
was
see, so here I've shared my screen with you.
oh yes, okay,
So
yes, I know what I'm thinking about. Then I think it's absolutely okay and it's legitimate to do it that way because there are a lot of things that may blur out in the background. I have a lot of my photos where the focus is very different, and that's just the way you see it. So I don't know if that answers the question, but it was
so I'm gonna look for the one that they generated with the background, and you tell me, because I think I'm sort of on the fence about this, because on the one hand, I think as a as purely a, I don't know, as purely as just a science experiment, I think it's very cool. And I think the idea of it is very exciting. But at the same time, it was not the image of the artist. This was not the image that they created, was not the image that he had in mind, number one. And number two, it certainly was not the image that we have any idea whether it's true or not. So here is the one that they created.
Oh my. Okay. That's
Right.
crazy. But they asked AI, what would you think would be here? And I don't think just right or wrong, like truth or not truth, because what is truth really kind of in that aspect? But this is what, I don't know, this is what AI saw. I don't know. This is what the painter saw. And sometimes these things that there are these things that you don't realize that you have there's such a focus in your eyesight or in your perception of things where the rest can get very blurry or can blur out. Or maybe I'm just speaking for myself in this aspect, but I'm aware of doing this. And
No, so I will say, look, there's a lot of things in this picture that show up in other paintings that Vermeer made. There's props in here that show up in other of his paintings. So clearly AI was generated some of it based on what it had seen in other paintings by Vermeer. And it just imagines that he painted this, right? This square. But I guess the larger question is, okay, so that's pretty interesting. And we don't have any visual record of what this background may have looked like. So it could look like anything, really. The guy could have been outside when he made the painting. But I guess my question for you is, how do you feel about this being done to one of your photos? In other words, let's assume that the first one is an image that you took for your project. And then somebody stretches it out and generates what it thinks must have been around the subject. That's where both the question of the morality of doing this comes in, number one, but number two, whether or not you're depicting truth or you're just depicting a person in the moment. And between this and, this, right, there's probably not a lot of difference just in terms of this being obviously closer up to the model, and there's probably not a lot of difference in the image itself, but there is a lot of difference in the way it makes you feel.
Mhm.
In photography, for me anyway, I feel like to do that in photography would be different. This to me, the one that they did to me is like an experiment and like kind of something cool from like the 1600s, because we'll never know what it really looked like. And this is a pretty good educated guess of what it might look like. But you knew when you took the photo what you cropped in and cropped out.
Mhm.
So if somebody did this to one of your photos and got it completely wrong, you would know in an instant.
Yeah. Any
So
question?
my question is more like, what is, I hate to ask you what is reality, because we could spend hours on that, but as between a photo, because AI generates a lot and
Mhm.
can generate a lot, I still think it does painting better than it does photographic images, just because it doesn't reproduce to me as real as a photograph. And when I say that, it doesn't, my point is like, if you look hard enough, I think you can start to see around the edges or in the face of a person that it was not generated by a camera, let's say. But obviously that's coming. And I want, how does that influence the way you, or does it influence the way you take pictures, the way you make your work? Because your work, your portrait work and your landscape work is very real, I'll say. And it evokes very real emotions. Like, for example, the photo you have of the woman floating on her back in the water.
Mhm.
I can't,
Underwater, black and white
yes,
image.
yes. I can't imagine AI imagining that photo and coming up with it by itself. Now, I can imagine it being prompted to do that, but I'm certain it would not look like your image. And I'm also certain, unless obviously somebody gave it a copy of your image, but I'm also certain that it would not evoke the same feeling that your image evokes.
It's a good thing we're human
Yeah.
and everything. These are the things that I don't think AI can replicate the same way. But I just, in my work, I also purposely try and create this. It's almost like a little bit of maybe a little bit of an inner child kind of this fantasy drummed up. You're in a world where you created a world for yourself that you find safe or interesting or exciting or it speaks to you. And creating this, so this image that you're speaking about, this is an image I took of one of my best friends. And it was we're trying to create, it's like almost you have a book, like a children's storybook, and you're trying to get the image right for this emotion. And this is something that, like I said, maybe going back to before, was you bring in all these things from your past, who you are, all the years accumulated, and all of the experiences and learnings, and bringing that into your image. And now I don't know what I think about, okay, is it a good thing or a bad thing what they're doing here? The image also before, like when you said, what do you think about this? I'm not really sure. It doesn't change the picture that AI generated. It doesn't change my truth of the image that I took and my emotion. So that's something like everybody, you took an image, you take images that I cannot take. I take images that you, in a way, there's something coming in there that they're very hard to kind of grasp. And I think this is a little bit where when you take a portrait, it's almost a little bit like a seance kind of. So you have, it's this very, almost a little bit of a spiritual thing. And I think it's super interesting to take this AI approach or this extension, if somebody else were to do an extension of the image, very interesting. It's just different. It's not good or bad. It's just different. And I think you have to face value, see what it's like. I don't think you can really compare apples and pears. And
So do,
perhaps that best way of describing what I feel or think about
well,
this.
I
But
mean, and quite frankly, during a long time for a long time during the pandemic, I wrote blog posts, guest blog posts for people about the difference between analog and digital. And I, of course, was a militant film shooter, and I have a t-shirt that says death before digital. And then it dawned on me exactly what you just said, which is neither one is really good or bad. They're just different and they produce different results. And that's okay because sometimes you want one result and sometimes you want another result. But so that leads me to one, or there are two more general topics I wanted to ask you about. I'll leave the one that's my pet peeve until the end, but what's your thought about this idea that everyone is a photographer now, right? Everyone, I shared with you that like a app for your iPhone where now everybody has a Leica in their pocket, right? And it is, as it's pretty good. Like that software does a good job of rendering what your very tiny cell phone lens sees as if you were shooting it with a Leica from the 30s if you want. I saw, and I'll read you just quickly just see, I'm shuffling paper now. Some statistics. So whenever this was, I think this was from 2018 or 2019, they said that 5.5 billion images are captured every day, with about 1.8 trillion photos taken annually, equating to about 38 billion a week. Now, obviously, even at the height, oh, in fact, I have that number for you. In 1999, at the height of the film industry, they said consumers took about 80 billion photos a year. Compared to now, we're at 38 billion a week and 1.8 trillion a year. First of all, I'm not going to ask you, that begs the question, where are we going to store all these images? But how do you feel about, because to me, it degrades, it makes me feel degraded when people say everybody's a photographer. Everybody has a camera in their pocket and everybody takes a lot of pictures, but not everybody takes thoughtful pictures like you do. Not everybody goes out intentionally. And even people's snapshots are, they count. But I guess my question is, how do you feel about, you're in a profession where people say, why do I need a photographer when I can pull my phone out and take a really good picture?
A lot of times when I tell people that I'm a photographer, I'll get the kind of honor or this input. Oh, I really love taking pictures. Oh, I have this camera. Oh, I really enjoy this and stuff. And I truly believe, I think it's wonderful. I think it's really nice when people enjoy photography. And it's so important to maybe say that photography for photographers, but also for people who just enjoy doing it in their free time or whatever, it's a very therapeutic thing to do, to photograph. It's a very calming thing. This is when I photograph, I don't really know what to tell you, what's in my mind. I have emotions, but it's a very, things go very quiet. For a head that's very busy, it gets very quiet. It's just like a very quiet space. And so I'm saying this intentionally. It's very therapeutic for a lot of people. Now, the question is always, okay, what's the purpose of the image? Why are you doing? I'm coming back to this why. I just need to repeat what I'm saying, but it's always this why and what's the purpose? What are you going to do with this? And there's people that take images for themselves. They take pictures for others or to sell them or to whatever. I think, and I try and look at it this way, and this is something that's also happened within recent time, kind of, I don't know, like maybe my brain has fully developed as an adult now or something, but I have always had this kind of black and white thinking with certain things where it was like, this is good or bad, right? Is this good or bad? And now I try and sometimes say, you know what? I don't know if it's right or wrong. And okay, there are, of course, certain moral things, morals, right and wrong, but I don't know if this is right or wrong or the way it should be or not. It's okay to just accept it the way it is and to just say, and to just take it at face value and not necessarily drive yourself crazy over certain things. And so you could, it's, I think what's important is when I say I'm a photographer, my cameras are a tool to what I'm passionate about. What am I passionate about? It's people and this psychology and this interaction and the identity and culture. These are the things that I am interested in, people, where they are. And whether or not with my phone now and I have the Leica app there or I use my other camera, it's difficult to say. I just feel like it's not one thing isn't better than the other, but ask yourself, what's the purpose of what I'm doing? And so that's what I tried. I don't really want to say this is right or wrong, or I understand what you mean when you say that, or it can feel a little bit like degrading, or you feel a little bit like with a photographer, like, well, I'm a photographer. I try not to look at it that way. I don't know if that's right or wrong, but I try not to look at it that way. And I enjoy so much when people are passionate about this, but everyone is doing different things. And I just ask myself, okay, why am I doing it? And for who and in what context? And everyone has different reasons. And of course, there's so many more images, which it's crazy. I can't even imagine the number actually. It's a bit difficult, but it's, yeah, just sometimes saying, what's the purpose of it? And to each their own, and just seeing it as like a self expression. It's the way that you see the world. And it sounds so cliche, but it just is that way. Yeah.
Well, I'll say
I don't think about that.
you are much more accepting, I'll say, than I am. I think that's because of the difference in our ages. But I will also say that having worked in a profession where people have been making jokes about it since Shakespeare, it's hard to degrade what I do any further than saying the first thing we should do is drown all the lawyers, right? Okay. That really doesn't make you feel good about your career choice. But the and with regard to photography, the democratization of photography has been going on ever since George Eastman was able to roll film up in a roll and stick it in a camera and have people walk around with it, right? I mean, that go ahead.
I do think it's important. Like when people say, oh, you're a photographer, it's kind of like, oh, that's cute. I can do that too.
Right. That's what I
I,
mean.
I do. No, I have to say that. And maybe I picked this up the wrong way, but I do have an issue with that because it's undermining something that someone is very passionate about. And
Right.
I'm saying tool now again, I'm saying, what are you doing with it? Because
Correct.
this project, like projects that you're doing, especially personal projects, right? You're very passionate about them. I get very emotional when I speak specifically about them or to people about them. And I'm almost a little bit relieved we haven't gotten into this now because I don't want to shed a tear on this podcast. But you know what I mean? It makes me very emotional. And it's different than if somebody were to say to me, I don't like your hairstyle. Because that's go ahead, shoot your insult. But it's this is something that you put your it's not 1+1. Like this is something where you put your heart and soul into if you really care about it, which in this instance, I guess you do. But you're very vulnerable about your work. And there for someone to say, I don't know, I shouldn't say more now, but I'm gonna bring up some other profession. I work in finance or something. What I do is really important. You just take pictures of the camera. I could do that too if I had your camera. I think that's just wrong. And I think
Yeah,
it's
and that's certainly not what I'm talking about. What you said first was exactly what I'm talking about because as a lawyer, when people make lawyer jokes, I think I say back to them, I'm like, when you need your trash taken out or something bad happens to you, here's my number. But at the same time, you can't practice law without a license and without the training and all that kind of stuff. So even when people make lawyer jokes, it's not as if they're saying what you said just a moment ago, where they respond like, "Oh, that's cute. I take
Mhm.
pictures also. I'm a photographer also on the side.
Mhm.
I take sunset photos and sell them to Shutterstock. I'm a photographer also." Right?
This is really difficult because there are so many people working in the industry. And I think this is important to say now that there's so many people that are so good and maybe they don't have a bachelor's or a master's in photography, but they have a lot of experience. And this is now what's important. I think it's not the piece of paper, it's not the leaflet. It's that we go into this degree or we go upon this education engaging with other people, looking at the history, looking why did they do that back then? What are they doing now? What is what is really the storytelling? What's this about? And why and morals and ethics and how to conduct yourself? These things matter. And whether or not you okay, there's people they acquire them through other ways or with years of experience, but it's this active role of saying, I choose to as a professional photographer, take on the responsibility to interact with these things and learn about these things, engage with this because it is important. And this is where we're exchanging work. We're talking about these things. We're having reflections. It's not just about me. It's not about you. It's about all the conversations we're having and the guest speakers that we're having on the course that are everyone's coming from completely different perspectives and areas and subjects, but we're all talking about the same thing. And this is, I'm wide awake now. This is really, I think this is so important because it's not the label of this or that, but it's this having actively engaged in an, I say education, I would say it like this, caring about these things and knowing that this is so much bigger than just yourself. So
Right.
yeah, no,
And
that's
and so the whole idea of the fact what you just said, oh, it's not about the piece of paper is the reason why I said you need a license to practice law. You can't be a lawyer without the piece of paper. It's impossible.
no, no.
And but like you said, there are, as we've studied,
Mhm,
innumerable numbers of people who are brilliant photographers who never had any kind of formal training in photography,
mhm,
right? In fact, I would suspect it's probably more common for people not to have had
mhm,
formal training in photography who are what people would consider like the great photographers of history. But
mhm,
my my point is, and the reason why I found it so interesting that that's when you woke up is because you're right. It's not about going to class to get a piece of paper. It's about being caring enough and being passionate enough about it to want to spend your time doing it and learning about it and having this exchange of ideas rather than simply walking around with your camera and taking it out and taking the picture of whatever you're taking a picture of and then just moving on. And not I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but there's a difference between a person who does that and calls themselves a photographer and someone like you who takes the time and spends the time to
I
try
agree.
and learn more and get better.
I
Good.
agree. Yeah. No, no, I also understand the direction, the question that you're getting into, and I absolutely agree with you. And there was this controversial post. I had made a post on Friends about starting on the masters and how I was excited for it, and what were my reflections back on the 2 years after graduation from the bachelor's and all this. So it was a very heartfelt post,
That was
and
controversial?
it was controversial in the sense that I had some really wonderful people, congratulations, or, best of luck, and some lovely, lovely strangers just reaching out and saying some nice things. Like, really, that meant a lot to me. But there was some controversy where some people said, what's the point of studying photography? Like, you don't need to study photography, or and I also have to say, what about the privilege of being able to study photography? And
Well,
I aware of the privilege. I'm very aware of the privilege per se that I am in the situation that I am today and where I stand, what I'm able to do. And I think, of course, you have to be conscious about these things, reflect about them. But people were discussing about this, and there was somebody who had made a comment and said, believe it or not, some people are passionate about the craft. It's not about the
the paper, the
in
diploma.
this aspect, no, but it's about really in realizing that it's so much bigger than yourself and investing time into it and wanting to understand it and caring for it. And that growth that you take from there is not something that you can just snap your fingers and it appears out of nowhere. It's hard and it's work, but I feel like you need to put that in there. And what you get back from it is tenfold. It's really important. And I don't want to say right or wrong, but it's so important that people also understand what it actually means to do this and how much it informs and changes your work and how much more conscious you become about the things that you're doing and the effect of it.
Well, so I that point really hits home for me because I think about I had mentioned to you I moved all the stuff out of my office into another building and I was going through I have a lot of negatives, like a lot. And before I started taking this course, I remember during the interview process, Grant asked me, "What's your idea for a photo project?" And I said, "Yeah, that's really my problem. All my pictures are subjectless. And I love taking pictures of pretty flowers or landscapes or beaches, but there's no one in them. And I really can't think of a subject now or a project now because of the experience of the class. And I'm not saying everybody has to have this, but now I look back at the pictures that I've taken, like of my son playing goalkeeper, for example. That's a project, apparently. my pictures that I have of political signs from years and years. Apparently that could be a project, right? But none of that dawned on me in the moment.
Mm.
I knew subconsciously that I was taking these pictures for a reason, for whether it was to document it, whether it was for posterity, whatever it might have been. But now that I look back, I can see that there are larger sort of categories of photographs that I was taking. And I'm not certain that I would have had that sort of epiphany had I not ever been in this class. I don't know if it was the same for you, like in the bachelor's. Like you said, you knew that you were subconsciously drawn to photography from a young age. But
Mhm.
had you not taken the bachelor's, do you think you'd be doing what you're doing today?
Absolutely not. And I think a lot of it goes back to I'm very grateful for Grant and what he's done and also believed in me and what I was doing. And I think I came onto the course, I had no idea what did I want to photograph. I was convinced I wanted to be a food photographer, which doesn't really fit in the picture today. And that's okay. But it was a part of my journey and coming to the place where I am today. And there was a big amount of foundational work, let's put it that way. I use those words intentionally now, put down in the bachelor's, which was kind of like, oh, okay, something clicked. And I am actually also very grateful I had those 2 years before that this master's now started, because we're in the first year, just started. And I had so much time to sit, and it was almost a little bit like heartbreak to reflect, why am I doing this? And why does it matter? And all of these things that I had wonderfully learned, accumulated from the bachelor's and on the master's. And I say this as well, that I think it's so nice that you said this previously about probably never have thought about these things or seen. And this is a group effort. I want to say this is like teamwork. And this is something where it's not a thing you can very easily explain in simple terms. It's very complex and it's very valuable. And so the master's has kind of been, if you finally touch grass, like you're like,
Yeah.
okay, I know where I am standing and I like where I'm standing and I'm willing to put everything I have and I am into this because again, that's what you do as a photographer. It's not like, let me switch my brain on at 8 o'clock in the morning and when it's 5 o'clock, it's 5 + 5. I'm going to switch off and go and do something. It doesn't work like that. And then it's also something that I learned from studying photography now that call it an artist, call it what you want. And again, they're just names. They're just names for things, but you put so much of yourself into your work to not underestimate that and to see why it makes you so vulnerable. And that's actually a really good thing because it means you care and it means there's a purpose. And I just feel it's been like such a big journey, such a big learning curve. And also personally, you have to kind of be aligned personally with what you're doing. It's not just work. I always say the best thing that can happen to me is that I sit at my desk or in the office room and I'm complete madness until 3 in the morning because
Yeah.
it just feels right. You're doing what you love. And it's not like, okay, I can't wait until the day is over and I can go do something else. That's not what it feels. That's not what it is. So I don't know. There's just maybe like this big, I'm not trying to pull this big morale or anything. I don't know it all. I really
No, I
don't.
mean, look, I totally take your point, right? In other words, I'm not trying to label people who whip their phones out and take pictures of things that A, they want to document, or B, they find pretty or beautiful, or they're walking on the beach and it's sunset and they want to take a photo. That's not really my point. My point is, I guess to quote you, it's different, right? Like it's not you can make very good photographs with your phone of a lot of different things. You could even call yourself a photographer, but it is more, I think, what I've learned anyway is it's much more intentional than that. You can love making images. I did before I started taking this class, but you may just, I love the technical process of it. That's part of the reason why I like film. I like the processing. I like the physical. I like to take the film. I like to see the images show up on the negative. I like to, before scanning, I would print them in an enlarger, right? That was a whole other mess, but literally. But it's a process. It's a very tactile process from camera to film to processing to scanning. And that interests me, right? Like the different
Mhm.
things that you can do and make happen because you messed up the way you mixed the chemicals.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I'm not saying that's good or bad. It's just for me, like you said, I'll be processing film at 1 a.m.
Yeah.
and I don't mind because I'm enjoying what I might pass out from the fumes, but I don't mind because I'm
Watching. Enjoy it.
right. Exactly. And so I wonder, and again, I'm not trying to be pejorative when I say the difference between everybody's a photographer and someone like you, but there is a difference.
Mhm.
There's a difference between somebody who says, "Oh, that's so cute. I'm a photographer too," and
Mhm.
you.
And I also feel like not everyone will get it, and that's okay, but the right people will. And I have to maybe also say that I have experienced that, okay, not everybody can know this. Not everybody knows this. And then explaining a little bit about what you do and why you do it and the amount of surprise or this kind of positive response that you get, like, oh, I see what you mean now. We can't, I'm going to say this, I can't really expect people to know everything. I don't know everything, but
Well, and some people aren't interested in knowing it, right?
exactly. Nobody does. But then there are also those, they just don't want to, or they don't. That's okay too. That's just the way it is. There's always going to be those people that are going to want to argue about things that you're saying or doing, but there are going to be people who get it. And that's the really valuable thing about it, where you can connect on these kind of things. Yeah.
All right. So now, really tricked you into the last subject, which actually has me
Dodging bullets.
a little terrified because it's because of the role that it will play in the upcoming semester of our class, but which is social media. And your story about threads to me is a perfect sort of example of that. But the idea that, and I hope Grant will not listen to this part, but the idea that photographers have to be very online, I'll say, is troubling to me in the sense that it makes me nervous when I say troubling, not from any kind of moral or objectionable standpoint, but just I'm not afraid of people telling me my pictures are awful, horrible. That doesn't bother me. But the idea that one has to subject themselves to that, these slings and arrows of, I can't remember the Shakespeare quote now, but misfortune in
Yeah.
order to be a professional photographer. I mean, look, there are parts of jobs that are jobs, right? That's why they call it work, not a
Mhm.
vacation. But social media to me, particularly in the visual space, is a lot of copycatting
Mhm.
and a lot of taking pictures just to get likes, right? Like the
Mhm.
idea that you count the number of times somebody likes one of your photographs to determine whether the picture is successful or not makes me anxious.
I think there's a difference also between this feed forward, like feedback, and someone just being a bully online. And I, the most important thing, and this is coming from someone who's very sensitive. I'm a very emotional person, and I can easily take things to heart. Sometimes I need to take a step back from it and take a breather or something and then reassess it kind of. But I it's scary. You put yourself out there and you don't really know. It's like you're in a bowl of fish and then you don't know who's on social media in that aspect. But to only worry about that, and this is, I don't know it all, but to only worry about that, I don't think I can leave the house anymore because then you feel suffocated, kind of. But what about like the stuff that you care about so much, those projects that you care about? There's a reason you're doing them and you know who you are, like in an authentic way. If you're yourself, if you're authentic, then okay, some people are going to dislike you. And I have to also say, when somebody writes something nasty or copies or whatever, there's going to be other people out there that are going to see that too. And they're going to probably think the same thing as you. And you know what? It's just very obvious, like whether or not someone, and it's important to take criticism. Like it's important to take other perspectives into consideration. You have to reflect on your work or your
Listen, I
mind.
don't mind taking
No, no,
criticism,
but
but there's criticism and then there's, criticism.
okay. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it is really scary because you are putting a piece of yourself out there in that aspect. It's not like, I don't know what else to compare it to really, but it's,
Well, I have to be honest. I'm very happy to hear your view because again, maybe it's just the difference in our ages, right? I cannot imagine growing up as a young person having all of this stuff about me out there, like that I voluntarily post,
yeah.
right? I could never imagine that. But at the same time, I also wonder whether I'm a little hypersensitive given that I'm living in the United States currently and you're not. I'll just leave it at that because I'm not trying to get into a fourth hour of this podcast where we discuss politics. But it is the attitude here is, I'll say, a lot more confrontational online. There are a lot of people for no reason at all. I used to actually put my political viewpoints online and then I stopped doing that and only put pictures online, but people still are confrontational even about
Mhm.
photos and photos that they know nothing about. They don't know what the history is, what the background is. They just see a photo and they're confrontational.
Very, you said it there. And I think it's almost a negative thing to say that you're hypersensitive, like that maybe you're cautious, let's put it that way, or you're more cautious about this, but it's not a bad thing to be cautious about things. It's not a, it just shows you care. Let me say like that. Like, I think it shows that you care. And I would be very concerned if somebody says, I really don't care. I really don't, I must do what I want. I mean, that's impressive in one way, but it also shows that someone isn't able to reflect that there are different people and perspectives out there. But what you're saying is there are these people that, whether or not they enjoy it or whatever it is, but it's something that I don't understand. But they are confrontational. They are not nice. But do they really know? Have they really engaged with what? And if they have engaged and they still have that point of view and they still want to go put that out, like out in the public on the internet, mind you, that's going to be there forever. Then do you really want to be associated with someone who chooses that tone of speech? I don't
No,
think
no,
that.
no. I mean, look, I have to be honest. I showed some work in a couple of our classes that I
Mhm.
took after the 2020 election, after Biden won, and I will never post them online. I don't care if Grant takes a hammer and breaks all my fingers. I will never post them online because literally I don't want to put them out there.
Mhm. But that's your choice. It has to feel right for you.
Oh, but
Mhm.
I'm not putting it out there out of fear. Nothing else. Not because I don't think like in another time, in another place, I would put them out there. Now, I don't know.
Then maybe do give it some time. I don't know. But I just feel like this, it has been so rewarding with certain things that you put out there. You have to be selective. You have to be a little bit, obviously put some thought before you hit the send button. But positive things that you get back or the connections that you form, or every time it's like someone clapped so loud you couldn't hear the people booing. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Those are the things that you have to hold on to, and not just, oh my God, someone's throwing compliments at me. I love it. Like, not in that way, but it's that people form connections of your work. And those are, then you have to say, this is why I'm doing it. This is what matters to me. And it's so hard. And I would be lying if I hadn't cried about these things myself. It's a very difficult thing. And I think it's a very personal thing as well, the way you write and what you write and stuff. But it's not easy. But I do think when you have these positive kind of connections formed and experiences, that's the stuff that's supposed to fuel what you're doing. Yeah.
Oh, I totally agree. I don't know. I mean, there are, and I'm really more talking about platforms like Instagram or Threads. I've had no bad experiences on Blue Sky or that photo community where people are there because they want to be there to show their work and see other work, right? In that surrounding, I find that's great. Like, people aren't there to be mean.
Yeah. It's about making these decisions, being conscious about where and what post, as in, like, you don't have to use all the platforms. I think there's a platform that I used to use quite a lot and that I don't use anymore because I just don't think it's the right platform to speak about my work, or the people are talking about different things on that platform. And I think it's okay to make those decisions given what you do. And it's like very subjective, like what you do or what I do, whatever. Choose your battles. Yeah. It's kind of halfway.
Yeah.
The things that you think are worth it in that aspect. Yeah. It's a bit like a minefield sometimes where you're not quite sure. And it's daunting. And like I said, you're very vulnerable when you put your stuff out. But think of all the discussions we've had as a group, or with visiting speakers. And that's the kind of stuff where when we hang up on the lectures, like the Zoom calls, yeah, I tell myself, and this is why I do it. This is why I love what I do.
Yep. Yes. Actually, I could think of about 5 hours more worth of questions, but I do think that's an appropriate ending point. That is why we do what we do. Why would we subject ourselves? And I don't mean that in a really bad way, but why would we add to what we do every day the additional stress and work of completing this course if we didn't actually love what we did? And I think that's really the key.
Yeah.
But I'm still going to be nervous about posting on Instagram. I'm not going to lie.
We'll be there to encourage you.
Thank you. And I hate that I'm going to be graded on that, but okay. So I want to thank Laura Skog for, now I butchered her name twice, being on this episode of the Subconscious Photography Podcast, and for being the first woman, the first European woman, the youngest guest ever, and all the other firsts. You have been a ceiling breaker for this podcast, and I mean that seriously. So thank you. And I want to also remind everybody to go take a look at Laura's work at her website, lauraskogphotography.com. I will certainly leave a link to that in the show notes and the description. And I, again, just really, really want to thank you for doing this. And I do want to mention, I'm going to embarrass you a little, that Laura was very nervous about doing this. She confided in me that she doesn't like to speak in public, but I think everybody will agree after they hear this, or maybe not the haters, but everybody else will agree that this was one of our best episodes without question. So again, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much for this. Yeah, for the honor, for the opportunity to speak on your podcast, and also for creating such a nice environment to do so, and such a lovely conversation. I really, really appreciate speaking to you. And I hope something resonates with the listeners and
I have no doubt that it will. No doubt.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
I want to thank you for tuning into the Subconscious Photography Podcast. today. If our journey through the art and science of photography has captivated you, please subscribe to the podcast, share it with friends, and leave us a positive review. We're excited to continue this exploration with you, and you can visit us at www.subconscious-photography.com for more episodes. You can take a look at some of my rotating and random favorite photographs that I've shot recently. And you can also email us your comments and experiences directly through the website. Your insights and support are invaluable to this community. Please listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube Podcasts, or whatever your preferred podcast provider may be. Again, I'm David Senoff, your host, and thank you for joining us.